All right, so obviously we're here to talk about the shoulder. Super stoked to talk to you guys, but just a quick background on me, since like most of you don't know who I am and where I came from. I'm a physical therapist. I got my doctorate degree a few years back east in Boston, and I kind of do a hybrid professional or career now, and I kind of combine the strength training background with my physical therapy practice. So I've been practicing for a few years, formerly just your classic private outpatient clinic. Loved it to death, really good facility and really like a good stepping point for me. But ultimately, being in the gym and being with, kind of just working for myself, to be honest, was the game plan. And that's kind of what I've found to be the most comfortable space for me. So that's kind of me, really brief background. I'm out of DIAKADI a few days a week, and then also back East Coast, East Bay, CrossFit gym. So a lot of the athletes I work with are CrossFit based, powerlifting, physique, more weight training based, but I do, being a physical therapist, you see everything under the sun. My style of practice, it's really based on autonomy and empowerment. So it kind of seems counterintuitive for the industry we're in, but you know, if anyone that sees me or work with me, I don't do a ton of manual work anymore. I've kind of veered away from that. By all means, it's sometimes necessary, but I really try to do a lot of education based and a lot of movement based. So that's kind of my style of practice. And if you kind of want to see more like into my thought processes, I'm going to talk about today. I also Instagram, I post a ton and I write a ton there. And if you want to dive more into like how I think and how I like to educate, I do a lot onto that. I think Jason sent you, right? Yeah. The ebook. Basically just that T-spine. We're going to talk a ton about that today. And that's kind of the basis of how we're going to go into mobility later on. It's on my website too if you, for whatever reason, need it. Cool. You guys want to learn more about me? You guys good? Shoulder? Cool. Alright, so, nice. We're going to talk today. You know, I know a lot of you guys have that coaching background and that anatomy base, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because I really want to get down into the last part, which is mobility and assessment. We're going to quickly just kind of crush through here anatomy, overall shoulder function, what we can do as professionals to reduce that risk of injury. And I'm like huge into education now, like I told you, so I'm going to sprinkle some things in about how we can actually communicate with our patients or clients. And then finally, like I said, mobility. We're going to get into assessment and basically try to, you know, maybe even pick people out that have some kind of injury or whatnot and go from there. So anytime you talk about injury, you have to talk about pain, and we have to set a clear-cut definition of this before we move forward. So this is the most current definition of pain that we have. It's a distressing experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage with sensory, emotional, cognitive, and social components. So my big thing here is like, I follow this biopsychosocial model now a little bit more than I follow this biomedical model. And because at the end of the day, we're treating humans. But when we're talking about injuries and pain, and I'm going to come back to this time and time again, it may or may not be tissue damage. And I think that's super important to understand when we're working with our clients. So that, again, just understand that there's a lot that goes into pain, and it's not necessarily what your image says or anything of that nature. Shoulder requires like a ton of demand, right? Anything we're doing in that weight training background, so whether you're going overhead, Olympic lifting, powerlifting, and even gymnastics, like we need a ton of demand from this joint. And whether or not your client wants to do this, it doesn't really quite matter because at the end of the day, we need a day-to-day too. And now a client's not going to come to you and say, hey, like I want to get my hand behind my back better. Like that's not their goal typically. For me, more likely a goal, but someone might want to throw like a ball with their kid or something like that of that nature. And so we have a high demand stress out of that shoulder. Again, if you don't have a background in anatomy, sorry, but we're going to kind of go through this quick. I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but we're going to go through three major components. Your ball and socket joint, so that's just your glenohumeral joint, allows significant movement, right? You can move your shoulder in pretty much any direction. Flexion, extension, rotation, adduction, abduction, all of these movements. We're going to talk a lot about the scapula. I think this needs to be a highlight or part of the focus and thinking about movements when we program. Most significantly, like you have a ton of structures that attach to here. So it's something to be considered. And then obviously I highlighted T-spine. I talk a lot about this. I think it's something that's overlooked quite frequently. But if you have any aspirations to do anything like remotely athletic, this thing needs to move. So we're going to talk about that a lot today. All right, anatomy again, we're going to just kind of plow through this. I think this is best based off palpation, super simple. We're going to start right shoulder. So just take your hand, 2 fingers, whatever, just right at the base of your neck on your right collarbone. So basically you're just going to slide 2/3 out to the side, just towards your right shoulder. Follow that collarbone, you're going to just drop south, kind of dig your fingers into like your pec muscle, and you're basically going to get your coracoid. Most significant, people talk about this, it's just where your pec minor attaches, so that's just a notable landmark. Also just part of your scapula. Jump back up on your collarbone and go all the way distal to the very edge, and you're going to get your acromion. So again, part of your scapula, right? If you follow south, or yeah, just drop right off, kind of right where your deltoid attaches, kind of just rub like over your deltoid, you're going to get your greater tubercle. So those are just landmarks to know. Just the more significant part is just, we have this space right there called the subacromial space. You guys like know this? No? Never heard of it? Never. So significance of that, you just have a ton of structures that apply in there, right? So these can potentially be, you know, whether they see a doctor or they're talking about shoulder pain, may or may not be related to these guys. So you got your rotator cuff, bursa, bicep. Now I will say this, I'll do this one first. Injuries here are very common, like you're going to hear impingement a lot, and you're going to hear about rotator cuff tearing. So everyone just like lift your right arm all the way overhead. Good. By definition, you all just went through impingement. You can come down. So impingement's kind of this weird term. I think there's 2 ways you can look at it. Impigement's normal. No matter what you do, no matter how good your mobility is, no matter how good your strength is, you're going to impinge these structures. It's to what degree that they're symptomatic. So if you see someone, you got a client, and they're lifted overhead or overhead pressing that day and it just hurts, this could potentially be something that might be going on. But I think it's just good as we go through verbiage here that impingement is absolutely normal. It's whether or not that is pain producing. If you guys ever got questions, just interrupt me. Otherwise I could just probably talk forever here. All right, so we got these other structures. This is super, I could not find a slide that just like cut all this stuff out, or a picture. But basically you just got this non-contractile tissue that just surrounds your shoulder joint, right? I talked about how much movement it has, so it's just a little bit of defense just to try to lock it down just a little bit more. Inside you're gonna get this labrum, just this little bumper, kind of prevents a little bit more movement as well. So the significance of this is people will talk about potentially having a labral tear, or you talk about your hypermobile client, right? The ones that are just like super flexible. Interesting about this, and we go back to that pain definition, you will have this subset of population that on their MRI, especially baseball players, they will show labral tears, and they're not necessarily painful. So I think it's super important when someone comes in to talk to you and they're talking about these things, understanding that you have this huge population of asymptomatic, so non-painful people that have these, what you would call damage as well. So I know that might hold true a little bit more in my population and maybe like the athletic trainers as well, but it's something that is important to kind of understand. So when we go through movement, I talked about the shoulder moves a ton, right? We've got all different movements. I'm going to talk more about spine and scapula. So most notably, we're going to talk about flexion and extension. That shoulder blade is going to can dump forward or can kind of tip back. You have its ability to go upward, so kind of doing anything overhead, and its also ability to kind of rotate down, and then finally its ability to separate and pull together, right? So given what I've talked about, potentially, does anyone know why these might be more notable of movements that we want to, well, I'll just say it. Why are these more important based on what I'm here to talk about? Anyone? No? No? No?
A good shoulder range of motion?
Yeah. Wait. You said good shoulder range of motion? Yeah. So, if you're dealing with someone potentially with this kind of impingement, this basically just opens up that space more. I talked about it. If that's spine moves into extension, if we're talking about just these structures that might be irritated, these movements are just ones that take pressure off the front of your shoulder, essentially. So when I talk about movements later, I'll kind of note these. It's just important if you're looking to kind of maximize shoulder performance and overall health. Does that make sense? Oh. I'm supposed to see this. So, first part of communication, which I'm huge on, and again, it might not actually correspond to you per se, just because the people that you see mostly might not be in pain, but it is important because how we talk to our clients and patients has huge impact on the overall success of their treatment or maybe their program, right? So a lot of people will say they see the doctor, they'll see a physical therapist, they'll see chiropractor, any other of these professionals, and we have this tendency as professionals to hammer home this strict like anatomy terms to people, and also really just talk about this in biomedical terms. So it's like, hey, like your rotator cuff's torn. From a standpoint of someone that doesn't know what this means, it actually has like significant negative outcomes on how they respond to either therapy, but I would also argue significant impact on how they respond to training. So, thinking about how we talk to people, trying to avoid these terms, and this is something that I'm trying to do less and less of. My background, we're hammered anatomy. Like, everything you think comes through your door is an injury based off of structure. So starting to understand that like how we talk to people is super important. So next kind of part we're going to talk about, or actually anyone have questions on this, or you guys pretty good so far? No questions. Just me talking. Perfect. Alright, so the first one, oh wait, I didn't say that. So we're going to go through 4. There's probably more that exist. These are probably the 4 most common ones. And I will say that we're going to go through volume, biomechanics, specifically under load. Yeah, so
when somebody comes in and they have an injury,
yeah.
Or are there regular questions you like to ask to really get them to differentiate the difference in the pains and where it's coming from, so you can figure out which structure is kind of hone in on where it's coming from, or how do you do that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I want to know, obviously, their history. I want to know what kind of treatment they received. My big thing is, what is that person's goals? Because what their goals are, if you come with a shoulder injury and you come in with a shoulder injury, you two have different training goals, different life goals. So as far as what's actually going on, it might be completely different. I've seen people where it's nothing once I kind of explain to them what pain is and how it's not necessarily a damage, within the next visit, it's they feel way better. So I don't think anymore really talk about I don't talk structures anymore. Or I try not to. I say hey, if they want to know, it's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the only piece. Does that answer you at all? And then we'll talk about strength, and that kind of overlaps into mobility, which we're going to spend a huge piece of today on. So number 1, volume. I think this is often overlooked too much. People want to pinpoint some kind of biomechanical fault or some kind of training error into pain or into an injury. When simply, we might just be able to manage this and they get a whole hell of a lot better. Like someone that just slowly ramping up running, maybe they got up to 15 miles and then took some time off, decided 2 months later I could do 15 miles again. I would argue their body's probably not ready for that again, and that was maybe a contributor to injury. So how we program is important to injury. I like to use FRC's principles here. Has anyone taken FRC? I know Sarah and I took it. Yeah? So if you haven't taken it, I highly, highly recommend it. What they're doing as far as explaining movement and mobility is just phenomenal. I'm going to touch on them a lot. Whether or not you take it or not, you'll get value out of it. they did a really good job simplifying this. Load is greater than capacity. So basically load can be training volume, and capacity is that individuals to handle that training volume. We could talk about capacity as far as like an aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, someone's strength output, power output, endurance. But what we don't talk about a lot, which or at least we don't usually think about, is recovery, hydration, stress management. All these things have influence into someone's capacity or into someone's load management. So analogy that I use a ton with people is just simply this water glass analogy. So what you have is this is essentially someone's capacity. So if they work out with you today, their cup gets water. If they go to work and have like a super stressful day, they put water into the cup. If they go home, they fight with their spouse and they get just a shitty night's sleep, you can put more water into the cup. Add a little bit other stressors. Can I spill on your floor? Cool. So you basically get overflow. So that overflow is essentially pain, right? So we have the ability as coaches to do far more than just program a good workout. Like, you guys know this, that's easy. But how we communicate, how we manage these other stressors is huge. And it saves them an extra medical expense coming to see me or somebody else. Now, lost that clicker. So when they see me, I'm usually seeing them in pain. Their capacity is dropped. The second you get pain, your capacity to withstand activity is diminished. So it's my goal to provide a load, entry-level loading, that's appropriate for them. Our goals, everyone here, regardless if you're in rehab or not, our goal is to make sure their capacity always exceeds load. So what that does, so if that cup overflowed, right? Or if I got this cup, let's call this capacity. What are some ways that I can change this if this cup's filled? Does that make sense? Anyone?
Meditation?
Make the cup bigger, put less water.
Perfect, yeah, so both, absolutely. So you just nailed both of them. You build a bigger cup, or you take stuff out of the cup, right? Meditation, promoting ways, that's what you said, right? Yeah. Promoting ways to kind of reduce stress and overall life stressors, like far more than how much volume they're lifting. I think it's super important, but I also think that we don't look at that much. The other interesting concept, and this has been kind of something that brings up a lot. FRC talks about it a lot, and I just want you to think about this, is that this term prevention is an interesting one. I use it a lot. I don't know if I use it as much anymore. I kind of just go towards this. It's just something to think about. Do we, as professionals, contain the ability to 100% mitigate or get rid of injury? I think the beauty of my profession is that people are always going to get injured. Like I said, I want to build autonomy. I want to see someone as few visits as I can physically see them, get them out, get them back to you, get them back to doing what they like to do or love to do. So, but someone like, if you go out, no matter how strong you are, no matter how mobile you are, if you go step the wrong way, you could roll your ankle like that. You might have a better chance of preventing that or reducing that risk. But just something to think about. That is all I got on that. Biomechanics. This is applicable, I would argue, more under load than anything else. They're not loaded. You could argue maybe depending on the volume control. But again, my background, and I know all you guys, whether or not you have a client training for a marathon or anything, you're most likely going to implement strength training into their programming. So this is where I talk a lot about. So overhead, biomechanically, what we want to see anytime you push weight overhead or you're doing repetition overhead, you need that spine to extend. We're going to talk about that. You want that scapula to clear as much space as we can through the front of the shoulder. So if you think back to those pictures I had with the 4 boxes, it's pretty much what you're going to see here. If someone doesn't upwardly rotate their shoulder blade when they go overhead, you might be causing more impingement and open the door for potential pain. And then obviously shoulder flexion. Anytime we're pushing, so again, weight weight training specific, you got two options really for horizontal push: bench press and push up. So they are significantly different as far as what your shoulder blade does. One, it doesn't move; the other, it moves. So thinking about what that person needs, like maybe you did an assessment and their shoulder blade just sucks at moving. Maybe they need to do some more control work, and maybe we want to take bench out for a little bit. Just something to think about. The other thing people don't think about, you know, that powerlifting, completely acceptable spine position to have that extension, or some would call it hyperextension. That's just, you know, biomechanically more valuable for that person to push weight that way.
When would you recommend open chain versus closed chain?
Good point. I didn't even put that on there. I would say open chain is probably going to get the shoulder blade moving more.
Open chain.
Yeah, so if you're doing like a cable press, landmine press, so the different angles. I mean, you could cue it any way you want. You could cue them to keep the shoulder blade down, or you can cue them to get the shoulder blade moving. But that's a good point. Kind of just depends on what their goals are. Like when I would do it.
Got it.
Yeah.
And in terms of injury-wise, if they're already in pain.
So pain, yeah, that's what you're saying. Pain is so complex that like I said, because people present, it's super hard to initiate a pull-up at the bottom, right? And we're always going to get like some kind of client that's going to try to jump, or they're going to kick of some kind of nature to initiate that very bottom. Or when they go through the full rep, they never go to full elbow straightening. They just stop, like mid-range, and yank themselves back up, right? So you can't get strong in a position if you never get or train there. So we talk about this a lot, is can we strengthen you at the very, very end range? Force couple. I mean, this stuff can get kind of complicated. I don't want to think too much into this, but essentially your deltoid, anytime you lift overhead, it's your primary driver, right? It's just going to take your humerus and it's going to pull it north, which will cause this impingement we talked about. Our rotator cuff is just important because we just kind of counter that a little bit. You got a question, Paul? You just,
No, I'm just playing around.
Yeah. So rotator cuff is just important. You know, it's just going to allow us to kind of maybe take a little tension off those structures. I will say I have nothing, or I don't have anything against like rotator cuff strengthening. You know, cable work down here or sideline down here. I just think it needs to be progressed like everything else we do. If someone wants to throw and they're only rotating down here, it's probably not going to cut it long term. There are hundreds of rotator cuff exercises. Some are more scientifically proven to be more valuable, but it's super dependent on the person and what they want to do. If they want to throw, they want to snatch, they need to do work overhead. So while this is not inherently bad, I just think that there's a more optimal way to do things based on that person in front of you. Does that make sense? Like you guys already have all the tools, like you know these things. It's just saying like, you know, work backwards, like what is their goal? And say, okay, what is the most sport specific to this? And then you're gonna work a lot of foundational work as well. Pulling, you know, your primary driver from biomechanical standpoint, it's gonna be lat and teres. Definitely gonna get rhomboids, mid-trap, all that as well. But the reason this is important is from a standpoint of what it does. It ultimately just opens this space up, allowing us to maybe not piss these things off. So again, this is probably more in a painful situation. If someone comes in with painful pressing, because that's like that is why people get more shoulder pains just through pressing, I'm going to program a ton of pulling. So if you have a client with shoulder pain, don't get too wrapped up into it. If it's not clearing up on your own through your programming, definitely refer out. But find like 1 or 2 entry-level presses, and then just do this. Because more times than not, this is going to be very helpful for them. There is kind of debate on this, like this pull to push ratio. The more current one I've learned is that vertical pulling should be 2 to 1 to vertical pushing. So you should be doing more pull-ups than pressing. And then horizontally, it should be 3 to 1. Yeah. I don't know if that's like scientifically proven, but.
Is that kind of a result of the assumption that in day-to-day life you're going to be doing more pushing, both vertical and horizontal? result?
That's a good point. It probably plays a role in it for sure. I mean, people talk about like, sitting and all that, and just rounded, like, maybe, yeah. But I think it's just too, you could look at biomechanics and just how it's like, for a more long-term resilient shoulder, this would be more valuable.
So my mentality is try to even
Yeah.
the size of any joint, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so, I mean, you won't go wrong that way, and potentially that would be fine, a 1-to-1 ratio. But if at any point, like, the shoulder starts being aggravated, just knowing that this is a way that you can still train with pain, like, that's a huge part of what I want to do, like, and I think it should be what you guys want to do. Like, if someone comes in with pain in the shoulder, it's not like pump the brakes, it's just like, not train today. It's, okay, what can we get out of you today and still, like, kind of move forward. I mean, if it persists, then refer out again, but tons of stuff you guys have at your disposal. It's just if you start thinking in, like, movement base, this becomes a lot more clear as far as what you can and can't do. This one, I love this one. This is my last one. I'm going to talk about this on communication. I absolutely hate this term. So, and there's some good evidence to start showing that how we speak and how we verbalize to patients and clients alike has tremendous impact on what they feel and what they perceive. So this article was more talking about spine, because I think like this idea of like core strength and back pain is like, from the public's eye, is like strongly correlated when it's in fact not as associated as we think it is. We could talk about that another day, but so this again, in my opinion, and again also through the literature, is going to show that this has an impact on the lives of people. So I will say this is a direct quote from that one. I'm just going to read it to you, but basically I've been told to do by physios is to work on my core. I've been told by various different physios and Pilates I'm apparently ridiculously weak. I had an abortion because I didn't think I could have a baby. I didn't think I could handle it, carrying it and holding extra weight in my stomach. This is probably on that very far end of like extreme. But I think it's super important to see that like how we communicate is big. If someone comes in and you kind of deep like in your head, you're like, man, I don't think this person's that strong for what they need to do. Don't tell them they're weak. Just say, hey, like, your goal is to golf. Like, I think if we can enhance like a little bit more mobility in your spine, really get your muscles to like work up to their max potential, like you're gonna be so much better at your sport. Like stuff like that, like trying to stay away from these pessimistic words will have huge impact. So whether or not you guys came for that, you guys got that. So all right, lastly, mobility. So pretty much what we're gonna spend the rest of today on. Before we go, kind of like pain, we need a definition for this. So this is taken out in FRC, it's the amount of usable motion that one possesses. You have two components to this. You have an active and a passive component. So to put those in the definition, you jump down. Passive is basically how flexible you are. So if you lie down, I take your leg and I try to lift it as far as I can. What will your hip joint actually allow me to do? Now, if I take my hands away and I say, hey, lift your leg, that's how strong you are, basically what your active movement is. Just important because, like I said, you can assess this. Being able to assess the difference of this has implications on whether you need to work maybe some passive treatment, like or having a foam roller or something of that nature we'll talk about. Or maybe I just need them to work on like owning that end range position. Does that make sense? I know when I was in school, like this, like kind of took me a little bit to grasp, but passive is super, super important to understand. So, once she gets out of the way. So say, I'll use shoulder external rotation for example. If I have them externally rotated, it can only go like, say to point A. But I can passively, if I can move them to point A passively and actively, they have to possess that same motion. But I know they need more to be a pitcher or a throw. We could say there might be a soft tissue limitation or a joint. So low hanging fruit, you guys probably know this. A lot of people potentially the pec or the anterior part of the chest and bicep, I would argue too, it can just be limited. These days I don't use static posture too much, or I actually don't use it at all in my evaluation. You can have the worst posture, but if you can get out of that, that's all I care about. Your ability to move out of that position. I saw a post one time, like, if you took like 50 MMA fighters and had them line up here from a side view, they're all gonna have like the worst posture ever, right? Like that's just the nature of their sport and what they do. But I bet you those guys are athletic as hell. And if you told them they had bad posture, like good luck with that. So, but it's just to start, just get you thinking like, yeah, you can assess posture, make note of it, you know, but don't hang your hat on it because they could have terrible movement or posture, but the second they can get out of that position is what I care about. So this is going to have influence on overall shoulder function. The other one we talked about, lat tears, that's going to really limit your overhead. Also like the ability to externally rotate. So if you're talking to someone who's just maybe super uncomfortable to get into like a back squat position. I did not mention subscap on this, but that is another muscle that will limit. And then this guy, for sure needs to assess this one. I don't know if there's a time like I don't assess this, like to be honest. Maybe if someone comes in with an ankle injury, because they're probably wondering what the hell I'm doing assessing this. But, you know, I think the next slide will talk about this, but dude, like shoulder pain, this could be an issue, neck pain, back pain. You need this for pretty much any sport. Rotational, this thing gonna move. Extending, getting overhead, like this thing needs to move. So we'll talk about assessment with this. If we lack maybe one of those three or something else, like you could absolutely have like your AC joint or your SC joint here be limited. I don't think we're really good at assessing that anyway, but just stick to like this low-hanging fruit we talked about. It's probably more valuable anyway, because it's gonna help like 90% of the people. I don't know how dark that is, but if we don't have good shoulder motion, you can potentially just long-term might lead to headaches. Motion might be lost with just looking and pain. I know you guys are just thinking like it's not a big deal, but like if you've ever like tweaked your neck and you try to drive, it sucks, right? Just being able to look over your shoulder is important. So we might, if we don't have good shoulder motion, we might be causing some issues at the neck. The back, we guys talk about this, but if your ribs flare up, your low back like hyperextends, right? You might just get like compression in the joint. Maybe the back muscles kind of go a little hypertonicity, so a little bit tighter. Maybe long term, this can lead to lack of motion and pain. Again, I'm gonna keep saying maybe because pain's far more complex than just how we're moving. But if this is something that's easily addressable, I wouldn't see why we don't address it. And then finally, this is actually a super interesting concept that more recently came across by a guy named Dan Pope, who has awesome stuff on the shoulder. He was the shirtless dude I showed earlier. Is that if you lack this motion somewhere, and you're lifting overhead, your joint actually might move more excessively with the inside. Maybe just like a little bit, like millimeters we're talking about, which might actually lead to loss of stability in the shoulder. That's just a really interesting viewpoint I picked up, and I really like it, but just a thought. So how are we going to maximize mobility? This is a concept or a system I picked up from Zach Long, who's a physio back east, and I love this thing. Like, this has worked tremendously well, and there's some good science to back it up. So it's three components. We're going to talk about passive. Like man, like the research on foam rolling is like really shitty, and I'm sorry if I'm not allowed to swear in that, but like it doesn't break anything up, it doesn't increase anything long term. You can do it, I don't have a problem with it, and I actually think that if it's a way to create a temporary change, then let's do it, for sure. But know that through assessment that they actually need this. If you just like actively saw them lift their arm overhead and you never check passive, you might just be like, that might just be a random guess that their lat needs mobility. They might need strength. They might need to you actually just load them and give them strength. So what we're doing here is we're just creating an like a temporary change in your nervous system. You open the door, which allows you to then plug in a movement or a group of movements to activate this rebound motion. So step 2 is your active mobility. Honestly, like, the reason I love this system is you can do whatever the hell you want in these 3. I'm gonna kind of show you maybe some ways that I do this, but you guys are all very smart people. You work with a lot of people over the years. You know these things. It's just getting you to think about it in a different manner. So be active. So say, I'll give you an example, I think coming up here, but if you have the lat, you found it to be stiff, you could foam roll it. Don't spend too much time there. If you're spending longer than 30 seconds, it's not a very, and again, probably my opinion, but science, it's not good time management on your guys' part. I want them to move. So they're gonna move, and then you're gonna load it. You can load any which way you want, but I'm gonna make a case for this fashion, which is eccentric isometrics. So there's some very good research as far as this, we're gonna talk about in a sec. Joel Seaman did a lot of work on this. If you don't know who he is, he's a very interesting kind of background, but also some really cool videos that are just super unique. But I like his kind of thought processes. So eccentric isometric, what is it? So we're looking at the eccentric load. You guys know eccentric iso, right? This is just providing eccentric stretch to your muscle. Good research to show that this physiologically makes a change in the tissue to elongate it. You can foam roll, it's not going to do anything for the tissue. You can hold static stretching, it's not going to do anything for the tissue. Load does. I also like it because I get them to move and you get to actually slow down through the movement, and so it can really just like hammer home a certain pattern. The hold, again, is kind of the same hold pattern or same tempo. I think the bottom one is just you get them to stay in a position that otherwise they would never want to be in, and they'll hate you for it, but that's where we need to spend more time and really just own those positioning. So you guys know, like, we're accumulating time under tension. You're gonna, through eccentric loading and strengthening and ISO, you get the extra value of strengthening. So if I could now enhance mobility, but also get them to be like muscle growth and all that, definitely gonna choose that. You can actually go pretty heavy with these. So you don't do as many reps. You can up the sets if you want, depending on the person you're working with. And you can actually start fairly heavy. I use this a lot in load management, this tempo work, and I just plug it right into this is like their warm-up set. So I always use squat as an example historically when I've given talks, but is that you say whatever they're working at, I would just have them do like 50% of their 1 rep, and this is their warm-up after they do whatever I deemed needed.